First of all, thanks to everyone who's actually showed up. I know that this is not specifically related to software testing and quality assurance, although I'm trying to keep it in the IT realm. But this is really important for you guys and basically for anyone in IT these days, because it's becoming more difficult to enter the job market and move around the job market with the expectations that are set by HR departments and recruitment agencies. So I think it's really good that you've all come along to try and learn a little bit more. You guys may know everything that I'm about to tell you, or you may know nothing at all. If you've all taken away just one tiny little thing from this, then I feel like I've done my job. Okay. Before I get started, I might just ask everyone to just keep their questions to the end. I do want to hear your questions, so please jot them down if you need to. But I just want to keep everything to the end because this is it can be a bit emotive. So I want to be able to keep on track throughout this whole thing, and then we'll focus on trying to answer some of your questions. So the agenda. Basically, I'm going to answer the question, what is discrimination? Then move on to how exactly it happens in our industry, and then provide you with some solutions for dealing with discrimination. So the end part is probably the most important part for me, because I'm not a person that likes to focus too much on the negatives, rather come up with solutions. And I think that's probably the most helpful for you guys today. So, why is it important that I'm here today telling you about this? Well, I've invested a lot in the software testing industry over my career. I've been working in IT for about 11 years in varying capacities, from project management through to recruitment. I've done a bit of business analytics, a bit of software testing, but throughout my career, I kind of got to a point where I realised how important software testing was. And it was at a point where I was working in a project where software testing was ignored and things went wrong. And so ever since that point, I've become quite a bit of an advocate for the software testing and quality assurance industry. I work for Revolution IT, as Zubin mentioned. I work there as an engagement community manager, which is basically just a really fluffy word for recruiting and making people happy. But I also own my own business called Shift Left Consulting, and that business is completely dedicated to helping software testers try and navigate the recruitment cycle. So in the past, I've done a presentation here, which is, as you can see under personal interests, the modern methods of navigating the recruitment cycle, a guide for software testers. So everything that I do is very much specifically related to HR and software testing or IT. My academic qualifications, I am diploma qualified in business management and HR. I am this close to getting my degree. I just finished one of my last exams today. I'm Prince 2 qualified as well as a project manager. I'm a member of the Australian Institute of Human Resources in the AIIA, and I have my ISTQB foundations. I finally got my certificate today. Hooray to me. One thing I did want to get across is, even though I feel like I'm really qualified to talk about this topic in front of you guys today, I need to let you know that I'm not an employee relations lawyer. So anything that I tell you today is literally just based on my experiences, but I feel like that's kind of really imperative to what you guys need to learn today. Okay, so before I get into discrimination, I think it's really important to talk about unconscious bias and presumptions. We all have these preconceived ideas about certain things in our lives. Me, I love dogs. I absolutely love dogs. But no matter how much I love dogs, if I walk down the street and I see a dog I don't know, I'm going to be cautious. And there's a reason for that, because we don't know what a dog's temperament is going to be like. It could be very friendly. It could be very vicious. So I enter that situation with a level of caution. That applies to people as well. And while these statements here are a little bit controversial, unfortunately they are statements that I guess a lot of people could kind of understand and maybe relate to. Maybe they think it themselves. So short people can't play basketball. I can't play basketball, so I assume that's pretty much correct. White people can't jump. Heels wouldn't allow to. And disabilities are limiting. So these are things that are sort of widely kind of thought about, but at the end of the day, they're not exactly real or truthful holistically. Short people can't play basketball, but this 5'3" guy can. Tyrone Muggsy Bogues. Apparently he was really quite successful throughout his career in the NBA, but he's just a tiny little bit taller than me. Tim Forsyth. He's the Australian 3-time Olympic high jumper for Australia. He can jump 2.37 metres. And this one is probably the most impressive. Mark Inglis, he's the first person ever with a double amputee, or basically no legs, to climb Mount Everest. So, as you can see, these sorts of things largely kind of describe things that happen, to certain groups, but there are the exceptions. Okay, I want to show you guys a video now. So, excuse me for a second, but I think this kind of sums up a little bit about the assumptions that people make. So please try and listen in.
Our brain is hardwired to trust what's familiar and be suspicious of what's unfamiliar. It's a basic survival instinct that's helped keep us safe for thousands of years.
We unconsciously sort things into familiar versus unfamiliar, same versus different, them versus us. Here's a test. How do you feel about people who own a handgun?
Don't attend church. Vote for the other candidate.
Are on welfare.
Don't eat meat.
Have tattoos.
Don't believe in marriage.
Drive an electric car.
Didn't go to college.
Don't speak English. Curse.
Are over 60.
Are disabled.
Drive the speed limit.
Love cats.
Love dogs. Can you feel your brain sorting people into groups? Was there a little them versus us happening? It can happen unconsciously.
So even though that was a short video, kind of shows you that this unconscious bias does happen, right? It's ingrained in us. It's because of the way that we were brought up, the things that we were exposed to that allow us to have certain assumptions about people, things, places, etc. On the next slide, the problem with unconscious bias is when it actually turns into something that is a little bit more overwhelming, where you take it into a professional environment and you use it in a negative way, and that's where discrimination comes into play. Okay, so according to the Human Rights Commission, a description of discrimination is treating or proposing to treat other people unfavourably because of personal characteristics. And there are a multitude of personal characteristics that sit under the legislation around discrimination, but down the bottom here there are just a few, just age, marital status, gender, disability, race. There are two types of discrimination, direct and indirect. Now, direct is basically where somebody picks on you because of, or treats you unfavourably because of a particular characteristic that you have. A perfect example would be, I'm not going to give Percy a job because he's South American. That's terrible. I just sounded like Donald Trump. There you go, I got Donald Trump in there. I'll hire you, it's fine. Because I'm picking on him for something that is not only completely out of his control, but completely not relevant to the recruitment process. Okay? Indirect discrimination is a little bit more difficult to find or to understand, but essentially it's something that's built into processes, policies, procedures for a business which indirectly discriminate against a certain group of people. An example of that is, actually a really good one, is Australia Post. They had position descriptions for a particular role that was to do with moving around of mail, and the position description said that the person that is suitable for this role must be able to lift 16 kilos. They were never required to lift 16 kilos, but they just put that down there as an arbitrary number, and that, as a result, actually excluded quite a lot of women from the process unnecessarily. Okay, now, how does it happen in our industry? There are quite a number of influences. The first and foremost is what I've just been talking about, unconscious bias. If you don't have the ability to reflect inward to your own behaviours, you're unable to work out that you're actually the problem. And when I say you, I mean recruiters, HR people. Sometimes they do this unknowingly, so I guess to a certain degree you kind of have to give them a bit of a break. But in the same case, discrimination is not acceptable. We have economical factors, so we have a very, very low unemployment rate. And obviously, as a result of that, in conjunction with the fact that we also have growth in our industry, we need to find the resources from somewhere. Graduate employment is not necessarily helping that. So we do have a lot of graduates in the IT industry, but there's a bit of a debate at the moment about the quality of the education versus the actual opportunities that are out there. So while we do have opportunities available for graduates, that's fantastic, it doesn't fill the skilled roles that we need. So as a result of that, we love to employ people from overseas, international waters. That's not a problem. But then we also have to deal with the issue of things like assimilation. Industry-specific factors. So our industry is very, very fast-paced and ever-changing. Unfortunately, this does have a bit of an impact on women, unfortunately, who just decide to go off and have children. If they're out of the industry for 1 or 2, 3 years, I can see a smiling face here, somebody relates. But if they're out of the industry for a certain period of time, unfortunately, they're not able to compete as well as some of their male counterparts. They get a wonderful baby out of it, which is pretty cool. I think a lot of people actually forget that that's a pretty cool thing to have, but you have to sacrifice. And that's where things like gender discrimination come into place. And there are human resources factors as well, and I mean human resources departments. So human resources departments have changed quite significantly over the last maybe 15, 20 years or so. They now have to deal with equality quotas. So they actually have to actively discriminate against men, for example, in order to meet quotas that are set by the government if their organisation is over 100 employees. So what I mean by that is if you work for an organisation that is over 100 employees, you actually have to report to the government on the statistics around your male and female employment quotas. And if you're actually not meeting a higher level of, or a more equal level of male to female ratio, you can get in trouble for it. And the last thing on this that I wanted to bring to people's attention is probably something that a lot of people don't think about, but recruitment agencies and human resources departments actually recruit towards value systems. Now, everybody knows that organisations have strategic goals and missions and vision statements and all that sort of thing, but they also have value statements, yeah? Everybody understands how they want people that are ethical and blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. So those value systems are actually built on who their customers are. Their customers are Australian. They're recruiting against value systems that are essentially Australian. So that indirectly kind of contributes to some level of discrimination. Food for thought, that one. I don't actually know if anyone agrees with me on that one, but yeah, food for thought. Okay, so I just want to touch briefly on some examples of discrimination that I've actually seen in the recruitment process. Before I get into this, so I've always worked in either consulting firms or directly for businesses, but I did do one tiny little short stint in a recruitment agency, which taught me a lot about how people deal in recruitment, but I think this is probably the most imperative type of experience that I can actually give to you that can be helpful in your, in looking for jobs or being recruited for jobs. So I've spoken to a few of you and some of the people that weren't here as well about some of the key things that seem to come up in regards to discrimination. What are the key characteristics that some of you seem to be discriminated against? And these were the 3 that seemed to be the most dominant. So I just want to touch on those because if I spoke about everything, we'd be here all night and I'm too tired for that. Not that you guys are not fantastic and I could spend all evening with you. So the next 3 slides, I'm actually going to be I've got some little quotes of things that I've actually heard from hiring managers in the past. I'm not naming names. I'm not going to give any details, but I just want you to know that they are actually the views of those people and not my own. I am 100% against discrimination in all of its forms, but this is going to be helpful for you guys, okay? All right, so the first one is age discrimination. I don't know how many times I've heard the words, I want a go-getter, and then when I say, oh, so you want somebody who's driven, motivated, goal-oriented and tech-savvy, they say, yeah, a millennial. That's discrimination. I have heard that one way too many times, along with the second one here, which is we need someone with battle scars. I actually heard that last week. Somebody said they want battle scars. And so I, once again, went back to them and said, all right, you need somebody who's experienced, resourceful, learns from the lessons, strong ethic. Yeah, somebody over the age of 50. So it does happen. Discrimination does actually happen. I don't necessarily think that people do this in a malicious way, though. I think it's just because, as I mentioned before, that that bias or the preconceptions. I think that's just how they categorise people, if you're a millennial, you tend to have these characteristics, okay? Gender discrimination. We need a really strong, assertive man in the role. I've heard that way too many times. I really have, especially working in recruitment agencies. And once again, you talk about those characteristics that a man would have: competitive, go-getter, driven, direct, career-oriented, strong, intellectual, sensible, powerful. And it still comes back to a man. I know plenty of women that have those characteristics. And this last one here as well, we have too many men in our company and we need more of a feminine touch in this office. This actually tends to come about a little bit more often in more administrative jobs as opposed to software testing, quality assurance. But I actually have heard it. I have had people come to me and say that they want somebody that has those characteristics. Once again, I know plenty of men that are nurturing, empathetic, compassionate, caring. Actually, most of the guys that I know in here are pretty much that. So what's saying they can't equally do the job just as well? And the last one is race discrimination. I only have one comment on this one because this frustrates me, because unfortunately it does happen. I don't want culture X. They're too lazy and unreliable. So once again, I say to people, okay, so you're looking for somebody who's reliable, competent, motivated. Yeah, I want somebody from a culture X background. This doesn't happen, I guess, as often as you would think, but it does happen. And yeah, in my opinion, and I won't harp on it, but it's completely ridiculous. But there are ways around it, okay? And I really want to share those. I want to spend more time sharing those sorts of things with you, okay? So, most important part, the solutions. All of the solutions are going to relate around the recruitment process, because this is what we're here to talk about. How do we get through those gates? What are the things that you need to do to become more effective at getting through those sorts of barriers? And it can be really difficult because, unfortunately, when you're dealing with recruiters and HR departments, they're receiving a huge amount of resumes every day, so they're less inclined to want to work with you unless there's a specific reason, like you fit 100% of the criteria. This is how you actually get very close to meeting 100% of that criteria. So the first thing is, if you're applying for a position, read the advert and the role description. Chances are the HR departments, the recruitment agencies are far too overwhelmed with work to do to actually spend the time going through every little bit of detail in your resume. So they want to see keywords. So what I suggest to you, and this is probably not very environmentally sound, but print out the position description, print out the advert, grab a highlighter and highlight all of the keywords, things that come up on a frequent occasion in those position descriptions and those advertisements are things that you need to then plug into your resume. If you're just sending a generic resume, they're not going to be able to make the connection between that position description that they've got or that advertisement and your key competencies. And I would even encourage you to bring all of those keywords to the very top of your resume, because statistics show that a lot of HR people, a lot of recruiters, if they can't find the information they need in the first page and a quarter of your resume, they don't look at it again. Learn about the company and the company values. So as I mentioned before, sometimes the company values are the things that they actually look for, even in a resume. I have seen that some people will actually put their personal attributes in their CVs, and I've got a template that I send out to software testers, which is a resume which basically has at the very top all of those personal attributes. If you can fit some of those personal attributes that link into company values, you're more inclined to get through the door. It might actually not seem that important, but especially for permanent roles, maybe not so much for contracting roles. I sort of touched on this earlier, but customise your resume. So I often will speak to people who tell me that they're the perfect person for the role, but then when I look back at their CV, it has nothing in there that relates specifically to the role that I've got advertised. So they might say, actually, I've got a perfect example for you. Today, I had somebody apply for a role, and when they put in their application, I looked at the application and I put them as not suitable. I then got a phone call from them and they said, I'm the perfect person for the role. I said, that's great, tell me why. And they began to tell me about how they had all this experience in UFT. It wasn't on their resume. And so I've completely disregarded this guy because he doesn't have experience in UFT, when the reality was he did, he just didn't put it in his CV. So if he had put it in there, I would have called him. And unfortunately, his name was an Indian name. So he may have very well have thought that it was discrimination, but it's not. It's simply he didn't do his part at the early stages of the process. Okay, this next part, calling recruiting manager after submitting with a purpose or goal. I cannot tell you how important this is. And I want to explain to you why, but I just want to explain that a little bit further and what that actually means. So when I say call with a purpose or a goal, don't be like a guy that called me last week who I picked up the phone. Hello, how can I help? I'm calling because I've applied for a job. Well, that's great. What am I meant to do about that? There was no further conversation. I'm not meant to drive that conversation. The person that's calling me is meant to drive that conversation. If you pick up the phone and call somebody, call with purpose. Have a goal in mind. This guy, what he should have done is called me when I picked up, said, hey, I know that you've got a position available for a automation tester. I have automation skills and I also have C# experience. I think I'd be a really good fit for the business, but I just want to make sure that you've received my resume that I've sent through. Straight away, I've gone into Seek, grabbed his resume, I've got it open and in front of me. So he is actually probably about 5 steps ahead of everybody else in that process. Sometimes it might be a bit daunting doing that with recruiters, but if you meet more than 90% of the position description, and I mean in terms of the technical and behavioural qualities, make that phone call, because otherwise you may very well get pushed to the end of the process, or you may be 5th on the list, but the first 3 may be perfectly fine. And they may go ahead straight away with the top 3 and just ignore you, even though you might have all of the skill sets that they require. So please, if you apply for a role and you know you're 100% suitable for the role, please call. You're also cutting down quite a bit of time for the recruiter. Okay, in the interview process, demonstrate technical and behavioural competence. I hate sitting in interviews with people where they sit there and nod and smile and say, I can do the job. Or I'll say, tell me about a time where you've had to deal with non-compliance in HPQC. And they go, oh yeah, I've had to deal with that before. I've done it plenty of times before. Well, that's fantastic. But where? And what are the particular issues that you came across? And how did you overcome those issues? I would love to recruit people just based on the, thumbs up, I can do that, but I can't. If I want to do the right thing by my client, and especially if I want to do the right thing by you guys, I need to make sure that you're actually competent and you can do what you say you can do. So demonstrate competency. Self-awareness is probably a really important one as well. Understand what your issues may potentially be. I myself know that sometimes being a woman could potentially be a bit of an issue for me. So what I choose to do is I talk to the professionals around me that I know and trust and ask them what they think about me and my career and what are my limitations and, how can I move forward into a career that I would like to be in. And listening to that feedback and being very well aware of what your limitations are and what the benefits, I guess, that you have or the things that you have to offer to an organisation are. Because once you're aware of those, you can address them in a positive way. If you have a particular skill set, I'm going to harp on UFT again. Let's go Selenium because it's better. So if you're really highly skilled in Selenium, for example, make sure that's communicated across in the interview if that's something that is part of the position description, part of what they're looking for. If you think potentially that the fact that you are from Wales, I'm from Wales. I don't know why. What would you pick on? Okay, maybe because people in Wales can't speak very good English, I don't know, or not articulate very well. I'm grabbing at straws here. But if you think that potentially somebody is going to pick on you for that or not include you because of that, maybe address it straight up. That doesn't mean getting in somebody's face and... actually, I'll give you an example of that one as well. So I had somebody who I interviewed a couple of months ago who interviewed very, very well. She wasn't suitable for the role that I put her forward for, but she might have been suitable for another position. I said that I would call her the very next day. I got a call from her at about 9 o'clock in the morning the next day, asking me whether I was discriminating against her because of her age. She would have been about maybe 35. So don't jump down people's throat and just assume that they're discriminating against you because of something. Only address it if you feel that it's a necessary thing that you need to do to bring light to a situation in order to turn it from a negative into a positive, or potential negative into a positive. Learn about and apply cultural dimensions. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in about 2 slides' time. But that one is actually a really important one, and it's really cool what I have to tell you guys. I'm a bit of a cultural theorist nerd, so just ignore me, actually. And the last thing is be genuine. Essentially, a lot of you guys that are actually here today, you obviously demonstrate quite a bit of motivation. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. These sorts of traits are things that people want in their organisation, even if you aren't technically right up to par with all of the required skills that they have. That motivation, that genuineness, that all those sorts of qualities, let them shine through. Okay, now... Nope, doesn't want to go. Let me just do it manually. Don't worry, I'm almost done, guys. Take a breath. Okay. All right, so what do you do if you're discriminated against? 2 things. First thing, assess and validate whether it actually is discrimination that you're dealing with. Probably the best thing to do is, in order to assess that, is to have a look at things like the legislation around discrimination, so the Anti-Discrimination Act or Workplace Gender Equality Act. They're pretty big documents. So if you've got time, fantastic. If you don't, you can do like everyone else does and go to some of the some other organisations like the Anti-Discrimination Commission, Queensland. I would also encourage you to talk to somebody that you trust, because if you get the opinion of somebody else who you trust, they're more inclined to tell you where you might be maybe over-exaggerating or under-exaggerating and give you some really good insight into whether you actually should be pursuing it or not. Second thing you should do is actually make a decision to do something and act, or do nothing and let it go. If you decide to do something, great, do it within 12 months of the actual issue, because if you don't do it within 12 months, your case is null and void and nobody will take it on. The first thing I would encourage you to do is talk to the business itself and give them an opportunity to respond. I think that's probably the most professional thing to do, because not all organisations are aware of their individual employees' day-to-day activities. It may just be a complete misunderstanding. But I think if you address it with the business first, you give them the opportunity that they should be afforded to respond, and also to be able to understand where some of their employees might be underperforming, and therefore give them the opportunity to be able to performance manage. If you're not happy with that, you can take it a bit further. So the next step would be, you could either talk to a human rights lawyer if you have lots of money, because they do cost a lot of money. But I think the most sensible decision would be to go to the Anti-Discrimination Commission Queensland. You can actually put forward a case about an individual, an organisation or a group of people, and you just have to make sure that you've got everything documented. So that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have in an email somebody saying to you that they don't like you because your hair's not great. But if you can have a diary where you write down very objectively what actually has occurred, and you have to take all emotion out of it. Absolutely all emotion. It has to be factual, it has to be truthful and to the point. And like I said, you need to make sure that's done within 12 months of the actual event itself occurring. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I think it's really important to touch on this guy here, Gert Hofstede. He is a social psychologist and cultural theorist, and he has been really helpful for me throughout my career in understanding different cultures, but also being able to help people assimilate into the Australian environment. I don't know how relevant it is to most of you here, but I think it's really important to know for everybody, because everybody in Australia, especially with how multicultural we are, and especially in the IT industry, we're going to come across different cultures all of the time. So this applies to everybody. Gert has this viewpoint that we are all programmed in different ways. Essentially, we're all good, kind people, But because of the experiences that we've had, we're all programmed a little bit differently. We may have assumptions about certain cultures or people from various backgrounds. But being aware of those cultural variances can actually build synergies and can make us powerful as teams. One thing that he has put together is, let's see if this thing works. No, it does. Oh, just here, this website. Hey, look at me being all technological. I would encourage you guys to either write this down or we'll provide the presentation up on the website. I would encourage you to go to it because you can actually do a bit of a cultural comparison. I've tried to provide a bit of an example down here of Argentina versus Australia, just to give you a bit of an example, a graphical example. But essentially what it does is the cultural dimensions, according to Gert, have been broken down into about 6 different areas, and they include power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. And basically, each country has been categorised accordingly against all of these 6 categories. And when you do a comparison between your own country of origin and someone from another country, you can see where the commonalities are and where the variances, the large variances are. And it can actually help you with understanding how best to work with that individual. I do talk to a lot of people in the recruitment space who are recruiting people on a regular basis, and I always try to bring their attention to this because I legitimately don't believe that there are a huge amount of people out there that try to discriminate against people because of their race. I think it's just, there's just a little bit of programming that's, unfortunately gone a little bit wrong. But there are some people out there that, especially in recruitment agencies, they're salespeople. So unfortunately, they don't really know too much about the human side of things. So unfortunately, sometimes you are subject to these sorts of types of discrimination. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's it. Okay. But this is the thing, what I'm telling you is my viewpoints, and I'm very self-aware. I'm very much aware of bias and perceptions of different people, and that's why I always try to give people an opportunity. It does lead me to being very tired all the time because I get plenty of resumes and I try to get in touch with everyone that does actually apply, just out of respect and so that they know why they are considered or not considered for the role. But some people aren't like that. It's unfortunately the world we live in. But there are policies in place, and I think this is the point of this particular presentation, is not to be too emotive. We are in this situation where there unfortunately is a little bit of discrimination that goes on. I don't think it's a lot. If you have a look at some of the other countries, if you have to deal with Trump, then you may feel a little bit scared to be a Mexican. But largely, I feel like all cultures, all genders are widely accepted here, and there unfortunately are just some idiots that don't necessarily understand that their views and their opinions are making sure that they miss out on some pretty incredible people. So hopefully you take that away with you, and hopefully I think some of the things that I mentioned about how to navigate the recruitment cycle to avoid discrimination, I think those things are really important. These are things that I've worked with recruiters, I've worked with HR departments, I've worked directly with clients. These are the sorts of strategies that are really going to help you kind of bypass that and really let your skill set shine through. So I hope you take that away today. And of course, if anyone has any questions, I'm always willing and ready to have a chat. Okay? Cool bananas.